Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I never thought a simple backyard could turn into a battlefield, but when Karen Henderson, the self-proclaimed queen of our newly formed HOA, set her sights on my property, my peaceful life in Lakeview Village spiraled into chaos. Fines, forgeries, blackmail, even a courtroom showdown. This is the story of how I fought back. I moved to Lakeview Village, a small picturesque neighborhood in North Carolina 3 years ago. It was exactly what I had been looking for, a quiet, laid-back community where everyone minded their own business. The houses were well kept, but there were no overbearing rules or strict guidelines dictating how you had to maintain your property. People here had a mutual understanding. As long as you weren't making a mess or causing trouble, you were free to enjoy your home however you pleased. For the first few years, life here was peaceful. My house was my sanctuary, a modest but comfortable place with a large backyard that I loved. I didn't have much in terms of landscaping, just a neatly mowed lawn, a couple of trees, and a fire pit I occasionally used when friends came over. It was simple, and that's exactly how I liked it. Everything changed about 6 months ago when some of the more ambitious residents in the neighborhood pushed for the creation of a homeowners association, HOA. They argued that it would increase property values and keep the community in pristine condition. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The proposal passed with a majority vote, and before I knew it, the HOA was officially established. Then came Karen Henderson. She had moved in about a month before the HOA was formed, buying the house across the street from mine. From the beginning, she was overly friendly, the type of person who tried too hard. She went door to door, introducing herself, organizing neighborhood meetups, and volunteering to help people with their yards. I had a gut feeling about her from the start, something about her wide, practiced smile, and the way she inserted herself into every conversation made my skin crawl. At the first HOA meeting, Karen was elected as president. That should have been my first warning sign. She took control like it had been her life's calling, eagerly implementing new rules, sending out emails, and constantly reminding everyone that the HOA was here to enhance the community. I figured she was just an overzealous busybody and ignored most of it. I should have paid more attention. At first, the rules seemed harmless. Simple guidelines about lawn maintenance, mailbox colors, and trash pickup schedules. Annoying? Yes. Life-altering. But then the community improvement projects started. Karen wasn't content with just enforcing the rules. She wanted to reshape the neighborhood according to her vision, and unfortunately for me, my backyard had caught her attention. I had no idea that my peaceful days in Lakeview Village were about to turn into a battlefield. At first, it was subtle, a few passive-aggressive comments here and there, delivered with Karen's signature tight-lipped smile. One afternoon, I was out on my porch enjoying a cup of coffee when she strolled over, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Riker. Lovely day, isn't it?" she chirped, as if she hadn't been watching me from across the street for the past 5 minutes. I nodded, not particularly eager to get into a conversation. "I wanted to talk to you about your backyard," she continued, flipping through her notes. "The HOA has been discussing ways to make better use of underutilized spaces in the neighborhood." I frowned. Underutilized? Yes. We're thinking of starting a community garden initiative, and your backyard is in the perfect spot. You hardly use it, and this way, the whole neighborhood could benefit. Fresh vegetables, a nice place to gather. It would be wonderful for the community. I blinked. Was she serious? "I'm not interested." Karen's smile faltered for a split second before she forced it back into place. "Oh, well, you don't have to decide right away. I know change can be difficult, but this is all about bringing people together." I stared at her. "There's no decision to make. My yard is my yard. I don't want a community garden. End of story." Karen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Well, the HOA does have some say over community development projects." That made me pause. Some say. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Are you saying the HOA can force me to give up part of my property?" She let out a small laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, of course not. We're all neighbors here. I just think you should be open to the idea." The conversation ended there, but something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. The next few weeks were filled with small, annoying infractions. First, I started receiving notices in my mailbox from the HOA. Your lawn is slightly overgrown. HOA violation number 14-3B, $50 fine. Your trash bins were left out too long. HOA violation number 7-2A, $75 fine. Your porch light is not in compliance with neighborhood standards. HOA violation number 21-9C, $100 fine. It was relentless. Every single week, something new. I had lived here for 3 years without an issue, and suddenly I was public enemy number 1. Then came the recommendations. Karen started leaving brochures and gardening catalogs on my porch with handwritten notes attached. Some inspiration for your backyard. Hope this helps. K. Imagine how wonderful this would look behind your house. I tossed them straight into the trash. But Karen wasn't just targeting me through official HOA channels. She started working the neighbors. One evening, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, a sweet elderly woman who had always been kind to me, stopped me as I was pulling into my driveway. "Riker, dear, I heard you're causing some trouble with the HOA. Why are you being so difficult? It's just a garden." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She sighed. "Karen mentioned that you were standing in the way of a project that would benefit the whole neighborhood. She said you refused to cooperate." I clenched my jaw. Of course she did. "Mrs. Jensen, it's my yard. I don't want a garden there." She gave me a hesitant look before nodding. "I understand, dear, but, well, just be careful. The HOA can be quite persistent." Persistent? That was an understatement. Then, one night, I caught Karen in my backyard. It was past 11, and I had just stepped outside to grab something from my car when I noticed movement near my fence. I froze. There she was, walking along the fence line with a measuring tape, marking something down on her clipboard. I stomped across the yard. "Karen!" She jumped, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. "Oh, Riker! I didn't realize you were home." "What the hell are you doing in my yard?" She let out a small, nervous laugh. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I was just taking some measurements. We're trying to plan the best layout for the community garden." I took a step forward, my blood boiling. "There is number garden." She sighed, shaking her head like I was some stubborn child. "Riker, you really need to think about what's best for everyone. You need to get the hell off my property." For the first time, the friendly mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed just slightly before she forced a smile. "Fine, but this conversation isn't over." She walked off, clipboard in hand, leaving me standing in the dark. I should have called the police. I should have put up cameras right then and there, because I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. After catching Karen trespassing in my backyard, I expected things to calm down. Maybe she had finally gotten the message. Maybe she realized that I wasn't going to cave in. I was wrong. The next morning, I found a formal HOA violation notice taped to my front door. "Unkempt lawn, HOA violation number 14-3B, $150 fine. Fence in need of repair, HOA violation number 7-5C, $200 fine. Non-compliance with HOA landscaping standards, $300 fine." I gritted my teeth. My lawn was perfectly fine, my fence was in good condition, and the landscaping standards were nothing more than Karen's personal wish list for the neighborhood. I crumpled the notice and tossed it into the trash. That was only the beginning. The following week, I received another letter. This one wasn't just a violation, it was an official warning. Failure to comply with HOA regulations may result in further penalties, including potential legal action or a lien placed against your property. That made me pause. A lien? She was threatening my home now. I needed to know what I was dealing with. That night, I sat down and read through every HOA document I had. That's when I found something strange. There was an amendment added after the initial HOA formation that gave the board president, Karen, broad powers over property improvements in the name of community development. Worse, the document had my signature on it. Only I had never signed it. A cold rage settled in my chest. Karen had forged my signature. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I knocked on her door, and after a few seconds, she opened it with her usual fake smile. "Riker, what a lovely surprise." I held up the forged document. "Care to explain this?" Her smile never wavered. "Oh, that. It's just a standard HOA agreement. All homeowners signed it." I didn't. She gave me an exaggerated shrug. "I guess there must have been a mix-up. But really, it's not a big deal. This is all to make our neighborhood better." "It's fraud, Karen." She laughed, a short dismissive sound. Oh, Riker, you're being so dramatic. What are you going to do, sue me? Good luck. The HOA has legal backing, and if you don't start cooperating, I'll have no choice but to escalate things. I took a deep breath. Are you threatening me? Her smile widened. Of course not. I'm just reminding you that non-compliance has consequences. I clenched my jaw, turning to leave. Before I could step off her porch, she added, Oh, and by the way, there's a special HOA meeting next week. We'll be discussing your attitude problem. Karen wasn't just coming after me through HOA fines. She was turning the neighborhood against me. That weekend, I was at the local grocery store when an older man, a neighbor I barely knew, approached me near the produce aisle. Hey, Riker, what's your problem with the HOA? I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. He crossed his arms. Karen says you're refusing to comply with the community's vision. You're making trouble for everyone. I almost laughed. My problem is that she's trying to steal my backyard. He shook his head. We all have to make sacrifices for the good of the neighborhood. You're just being selfish. I bit back a sharp reply. This was Karen's doing. She was poisoning the well, spreading lies about me to make me look like the villain. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, I knew exactly what to expect. I walked into the community center and felt dozens of eyes on me. Karen stood at the front, smiling like a queen addressing her subjects. She cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming. We have some concerns about Mr. Wells's unwillingness to participate in community efforts. A murmur ran through the crowd. Karen turned her gaze on me. Riker, perhaps you'd like to explain why you refuse to comply with basic HOA rules. I folded my arms. Because they're not basic rules. They're just things you're making up to harass me. Her smile didn't falter. Oh, Riker, you've been given multiple warnings, and yet you continue to resist. If you keep this up, the HOA will have no choice but to take legal action. You mean the fake violations you keep sending me? Or maybe the fraud you committed by forging my signature? The room went silent. Karen's eyes flashed. That's a very serious accusation. I pulled a stack of papers from my bag. And I have proof. I laid it all out. The forged document, the absurd fines, the video footage of her trespassing in my yard. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. A couple of neighbors started whispering to each other. Karen was losing control of the room. She let out a dramatic sigh. I'm deeply disappointed that you would try to undermine our community's progress. I narrowed my eyes. And I'm deeply disappointed that you're a fraud. A tense silence filled the room. Then, finally, someone in the crowd spoke. Is this true, Karen? She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked nervous. I had publicly called her out, and now she had to fight to keep her grip on power. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about some petty HOA dispute anymore. It was war. I knew Karen wouldn't back down. Publicly calling her out at the HOA meeting might have shaken her confidence, but it wasn't enough to make her stop. If anything, it made her more dangerous. The next morning, I stepped outside to find my trash cans knocked over, garbage strewn across my driveway. At first, I thought it was raccoons, but when I checked my security cameras, the footage told a different story. Karen. She had come by in the middle of the night, knocked the bins over herself, then took photos, probably to claim I was violating another HOA rule. I was livid. That same day, I received another violation notice. Failure to maintain a clean and presentable exterior, $250 fine. Repeated non-compliance with community standards, final warning before legal action. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. I decided to confront her, again. I knocked on her door, my patience worn thin. She answered with her usual plastic smile. Riker, I was just about to call you. We need to discuss your standing with the HOA. I crossed my arms. Cut the crap, Karen. I have you on video knocking over my trash cans. You're fabricating violations against me. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she let out a small laugh. Oh, Riker, you're making such a big deal out of nothing. A little mess here, a little misunderstanding there. It all balances out. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. I'm done playing games. If you don't back off, I'm taking this to the authorities. Her smile dropped, and for the first time, I saw something else in her eyes. Calculating coldness. You know, she said, leaning against the doorframe, it would be a real shame if certain things about you got out. I frowned. What the hell are you talking about? She pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me. I opened it and felt my stomach tighten. Inside were doctored photos, images of me, digitally altered, making it look like I had been dumping trash onto a neighbor's property, vandalizing fences, even tampering with HOA documents. I looked back at her in disbelief. You forged these. She shrugged. I prefer the term strategically created. Now, if you want to avoid a scandal, I suggest you drop your little complaints and start cooperating with the HOA. Otherwise, well, I can't control how people will react to these. I gritted my teeth. She was trying to blackmail me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. I wasn't going to let her see that she was getting to me. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Karen. She smirked. Oh, Riker, you still don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? I turned and walked away, my fists clenched at my sides. She had declared war. Fine. I was ready to fight back. I knew I had no choice. Karen had crossed a line. Blackmail, forged documents, fabricated violations. It was no longer just an annoying HOA dispute. It was a full-scale attack on me and my rights as a homeowner. I spent the next 2 days gathering every piece of evidence I had against her. Security camera footage? Check. Copies of the absurd HOA violations? Check. The forged document with my fake signature? Definitely check. I even had digital forensics analyze the blackmail photos, confirming they had been altered. Then I called my lawyer. We have enough to bury her, he told me after reviewing everything. But be prepared. People like Karen don't go down without a fight. I was more than prepared. A week later, Karen was officially served with a lawsuit. The charges? Forgery, fraud, harassment, defamation, and criminal trespassing. The moment she received the summons, the entire neighborhood felt the shift in power. For months, she had ruled over Lakeview Village like a dictator. But now, she was the one backed into a corner. Of course, she didn't go down quietly. She immediately filed a counter lawsuit, claiming that I was the one harassing her, that I had fabricated evidence to slander her good name. She even had a few of her HOA loyalists sign statements against me, all people she had either bribed or bullied into submission. But there was a problem with her defense. I had the truth on my side. The day of the hearing, the tension was thick. I sat at my table with my attorney, while Karen sat across from me, wearing her usual fake confidence-like armor. Her lawyer, a man who clearly realized too late what kind of client he was representing, flipped through her stack of evidence, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The judge, a stern-looking woman with piercing gray eyes, wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. Mr. Wells, you claim that Ms. Henderson engaged in harassment, forgery, and fraudulent activity against you. Can you present your evidence? I nodded, standing up. First, I played the security footage. There was Karen, in the dead of night, knocking over my trash cans, measuring my yard, and even attempting to plant HOA flags on my property. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Next, I presented the forged document. A handwriting expert testified that the signature on it was a forgery. Karen's lawyer visibly winced. Then I showed the forensic analysis of the blackmail photos, proving that they had been digitally altered. At that point, the judge looked at Karen over her glasses. Ms. Henderson, would you care to explain why you submitted falsified evidence against Mr. Wells? For the first time, Karen had nothing to say. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She glanced at her lawyer, who was already packing up his briefcase, clearly realizing this case was lost. But the final nail in her coffin was yet to come. As I sat back down, my lawyer called a surprise witness, Karen's former best friend from the HOA board, Linda Patterson. Linda hesitated at first, then sighed. I was on Karen's side in the beginning, she admitted, but then I started seeing what she was really doing. She manipulated us. She forged signatures, fabricated violations, and blackmailed people into submission. Karen's jaw dropped. Linda wasn't done. She told me she would get rid of Riker one way or another, that he was in the way of her plans. I saw her creating those fake photos. I didn't say anything because I was scared of what she'd do to me. The entire courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Even the judge looked taken aback. Karen was finished. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. Karen was found guilty of fraud, forgery, trespassing, and harassment. She was ordered to pay me $250,000 in damages and legal fees. The HOA was disbanded, and all unjust fines and penalties imposed by Karen were officially voided. A permanent restraining order was placed against her. She was legally forbidden from coming near me or my property ever again. And the final blow. The judge referred the case for criminal prosecution. Karen wasn't just losing her power, she was facing potential jail time. As I left the courtroom, she tried one last desperate move. "Riker, please, you don't have to do this." I turned back, meeting her eyes. "You did this to yourself, Karen." Then I walked out, leaving her to face the consequences of her own arrogance. The court ruling shattered Karen's empire overnight. The HOA, once a tool she wielded like a weapon, was officially dissolved. Every ridiculous fine, every fabricated violation, every petty rule she had enforced, all of it was wiped away. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But Karen was falling apart. At first, she refused to accept reality. The day after the verdict, she stormed around the neighborhood, banging on doors, demanding support. But now that she had no power, the very people she had bullied into submission turned their backs on her. I overheard one of my neighbors, Mr. Carter, shut his door in her face. "You got what you deserved, Karen. Stay away from me and my family." The rumors spread fast. Karen had once positioned herself as the savior of Lakeview Village. Now, she was nothing more than a disgraced fraud. People whispered about her forgery and blackmail, about how she had nearly stolen my property, about how she had abused her position for months. She had spent so much time manipulating the neighborhood into hating me. Now, they hated her. With the $250,000 judgment hanging over her, Karen's financial situation quickly collapsed. She tried to appeal the ruling, but the court rejected it immediately, given the overwhelming evidence against her. Her bank accounts were frozen for debt collection. The next week, I saw the for sale sign go up in front of her house. Karen had once lorded over this neighborhood like a queen. Now she was being forced out. If losing her home wasn't bad enough, Karen's problems were far from over. 3 weeks after the civil case ended, my lawyer called me. "Riker, you're going to want to hear this." The district attorney had reviewed our case and decided to press criminal charges against Karen for forgery, fraud, and criminal trespassing. It meant possible jail time. I barely had time to process the news when I saw police cars pull up in front of Karen's house later that evening. From my front porch, I watched as 2 officers knocked on her door. It took her a minute, but she finally stepped outside, dressed in her usual business casual clothes, as if she was still the HOA president she no longer was. I saw her argue with the cops, but it was useless. Then they put her in handcuffs. A few neighbors had gathered outside, watching in silence as Karen Henderson was officially arrested. I thought she might scream, might try to blame me one last time. Instead, she just stood there, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground as the police read her rights. Then they took her away, and just like that, Karen was gone. With Karen gone, Lakeview Village finally felt like home again. The HOA was dismantled, and every fine and penalty that had been imposed under Karen's reign was officially erased. It was as if the past 6 months had been a bad dream, except for the very real legal battle that had unfolded. But more than anything, I finally had my peace back. For the first time in months, I could step onto my porch without feeling watched. I could sit in my backyard without fearing another ridiculous violation. My home was mine again, in every sense of the word. The neighbors, those who had once whispered about me, began apologizing. "Riker, we should have believed you. I had no idea how bad it had gotten. She fooled all of us." It didn't matter anymore. Karen's reign was over. A few weeks later, I received one last update about Karen. She pled guilty to reduced charges, avoiding a long prison sentence but still facing serious consequences. She was convicted of forgery and criminal trespassing, resulting in a felony record. She lost her real estate license, meaning she could never work in property management again. She was forced to pay restitution, ensuring I received every last cent of the money she owed me. And perhaps the most ironic part? She was banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. For someone who had built her entire identity around controlling others, it was the ultimate punishment. Life moved on. Karen's house sold quickly, and the new owners, a quiet, respectful couple, introduced themselves without any brochures, fines, or HOA threats. It was refreshing. One evening, I stood in my backyard looking over the very space Karen had tried so hard to steal. I had been so close to losing everything, all because one woman let her hunger for control spiral out of control. I had learned a valuable lesson. Your home is yours. Never let anyone take it from you. And more importantly, never underestimate how dangerous a person can become when given even the smallest amount of power. As I sat by my fire pit that night, the cool North Carolina breeze in the air, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace.